Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto anime review. This one's going to be for episode 283, and this is the second episode of the anime adaptation of this light novel, Sasuke's story, the Uchiha and the Heavenly Stardust. So, we cover another roughly 50-ish pages here. We covered a little bit more of this book than we covered last time out. That's mainly because the first episode of the arc also covered a little bit of the Kakashi novel, because again, remember, this is book 2 of a 3-book trilogy of books. So there is a Kakashi book beforehand and a Naruto book that follows this. So it is a little weird why this is getting an adaptation in manga and anime before any of the other stuff, but at least they're incorporating the Kakashi side of the plot a little bit more into things here. We got some references. We saw the scene from Kakashi from the last episode come into play in this episode to basically change the mission that Sasuke's on a little bit as well. So, the focus of this episode was definitely on introducing Sakura into this arc. As you can see from the cover of the book, the two of them are on the cover, so it makes sense. We were waiting for this to happen. And it's pretty nicely done the way it is. Sasuke has another encounter with the dinosaur, dragon, I suppose, as they're sort of referring to it right now. But it's a dinosaur, of course. We can all see that. And this time he takes a little kind of nick on his cheek that cuts him. And it turns out that the claws were poisoned with a pretty devastating poison. So Sasuke, who has pretty good poison resistance, actually is pretty quickly affected by this and can barely keep going. He is saved by Sakura, and so the reveal here is that Sakura, to basically relay information to sort of adjust Sasuke's mission, has come in as the new doctor at the prison. And she explains to him what's happening here. So they have a couple of really nice dialogue scenes together in this episode, where we get some of their, the shipping stuff with them, but also we see the plot actually progress as well. And I thought this was all really well done. This is obviously one of the highlights of this arc, is that it is an arc that does finally, tackle this relationship a little bit more and cover it in more of a kind of even kind of sense ultimately. But we, of course, have to deal with the idea that initially Sasuke still wants to do this all on his own. And that is out of a sense of wanting to protect Sakura, which she acknowledges. She likes that, but she does have to be involved in this mission. And she logically points out to him that, hey, you're great at doing these missions when it just requires the typical sort of stealth and then, heavy strength action. But this one requires a little bit more intelligence gathering, figuring out kind of puzzles, mysteries and stuff like that. And yeah, you kind of need me here. It also, because of the way you've infiltrated the prison as a prisoner, it also benefits us that I'm actually one of the employees here. So it makes complete sense. Sasuke does see the logic of this and is ultimately fine with this. And you can see as the episode progresses, he's perfectly fine meeting up with her to discuss the rest of the mission once she's on board for it. So that's all fine. But one of the main takeaways from the first part of the first meeting that they have is that Sasuke's cellmate, Gigi, is actually listening to their conversation outside. Now, it was just because he was going to get checked up himself, but he does find out that they are married. And so this relates into this kind of theme that we went on in the first episode, and it's kind of a theme throughout the whole arc of just, in Redaku, you exchange rings when you get married, which is different than the rest of the ninja world, of course. So Sasuke has noted this a few times, and then while he's discussing the kind of aftermath of this with Gigi basically being hey, they managed to get around the fact that okay, he doesn't know we're ninjas infiltrating as part of some secret mission. They sort of frame what's happening here as more that yeah, Sasuke is still someone who's in prison, and she just wants to see her husband, and so has kind of got in as the doctor. So they're framing it more out of love on Sakura's part, that's why she's here. rather than anything else going on. And he completely buys into that because it's revealed that he has a fiancée himself who he talks about a lot, and he's fully on board with that. He agrees with Sasuke. Yeah, I won't tell anyone. I completely understand. If other people knew, she'd eventually get kind of thrown out as being the doctor, and that's not going to help anyone, basically. So that's nice. But while they're talking about this, Gigi's just like, oh, I didn't know you were married. And they discuss, I suppose, some of the details of their relationship. And Sasuke points out that, yeah, it's normal for us to not be like around each other all that much because I'm needed outside the village, she's needed in the village. And he's like, oh, how long do you spend apart? And Sasuke just kind of casually is just like, the longest was like a couple of years. And he's like, what? Like, you can't say that with a straight face. Like, you're married. Like, you're meant to be around each other a bit more regularly than that. And because I suppose Gigi at this point is just like a normal person to Sasuke, he just kind of like, oh, he's kind of like, oh, is that so? And he I think he knows that like he's sort of put a lot of sort of like burden in a way on Sakura by being away so often. But it being pointed out so bluntly by someone who doesn't really know him that well, I suppose, really helps to put into perspective that like, yeah, she's pretty much like a saint for kind of putting up with that the whole time through. It's like great that like you both trust each other so much, but it's like, you know, you need to be seen to do something to kind of make up for this effectively. And he does that. And that's what's so nice about this scene, the whole ring thing kind of coming full circle here. He actually, when they're alone, just in his own way, just gives her the ring. And it's a notable thing coming from Sasuke without it being this giant dialogue scene where he like reconfesses his love for her and stuff like that. It's just the action of holding her hand, putting the ring on her and just pointing it out to her. And you can see that she is really taken aback by this gesture. And it's a very nice kind of moment for their relationship to have that as just a sort of, especially given that like the idea is that they will be separated for quite a long amount of time. So for Sakura to have that ring as a kind of further kind of symbol of their relationship is a really nice thing. So I think that works out on kind of like multiple regards how exactly that works. So that's cool. He where he gets the ring from, he basically makes it using Earth style jutsu. In the same way that I think in the first episode he made a gem to be part of the kind of betting that was going on. So they set up the idea that he can use sort of like compressed earth style to make kind of crystals and stuff like that. That's how advanced he is, of course. So that's the explanation for the full ring thing, of course. But getting more into the actual plot, they are here to investigate the Sage of Six Paths and how he recovered from the same illness that Naruto is now suffering from. Now, they do reveal that it's basically because some sort of a chakra-related illness that is associated with people who have held tail beasts inside of them. So that makes complete sense with what's going on here. Naruto and Sage of Six Paths, it's a nice connection. Now, what the change in the mission is that they got the book that we saw Kakashi get from the end of the last episode. And the information that it has effectively tells the full story that, like, okay, he met the, like, what it was, astronomer guy at Rediku. This is where we know he recovered. But specifically what happened, and according to legend, is that they were looking up at the sky and some sort of a meteorite came down, split into two, and the meteorite had these things called ultra particles like in it or associated with it, and it was these ultra particles that actually cured the Sage of the Six Paths. And he was aware of what happened here, and so has left behind this sort of riddle mystery about how to find like the remaining ultra particles. And the key part of it is that if you want to find it, you have to basically follow the map of the heavens, which is related to basically why we're here in Rediku, is that they need to find this book, which is in Rediku, where all this happened, and that's what they're trying to figure out. So this is what transitions the story into the next stage of things, where they have to go to the library. And again, thankfully, one of Sasuke's other cellmates is the librarian. But interestingly, they do reveal that like he doesn't know how to read. So the idea is that very few people in the prison know how to read, and they've made someone who doesn't know how to read the librarian. So take from that what you will. But they want to do this. So Sakura is the one who goes in, and that like you assume one of the employees will have access to more books than the inmates. And so even she is actually refused access to this book because it's held down in the basement, and it is one of the more expensive books. Because again, this is where we get the idea that this prison is actually in like an observatory, an ancient observatory. That's why there's that whole kind of weirdness between like, wait, why is it a prison now, but it was this ancient location in the past? That's effectively what we're talking about here. So that's the kind of like takeaway here. That's why this library in the prison has notable kind of like relics like this map. But to get it, Sakura is kind of like, okay, you guys like to gamble. What if I gamble for the key? You don't have to tell the warden anything. Just give me the key. Let me go down there if I beat you at gambling. And so we get the full setup where they're going to play this game, the sort of like star chart card game. And Sakura has never heard of this game before, so she memorizes the card deck and begins to play. Now, this is where you get one of the few differences in this episode from what actually happens in the novel. Now, it's a relatively small difference that I don't think changes too much because they ultimately do what the actual book did. But what happens in the show, in the episode, is that they just have Sakura beats the guy and then explains to Sasuke afterwards that, yeah, I memorized all the hands, I memorized all the cards because it's an old deck used in the prison. So each card has dings and little different spots on it. And so that's how I was able to sort of, cheat a little bit, do a bit of sort of like card counting style thing to win the game. And then she explains afterwards that she learned how to do this because she would often, in her training with Tsunade, do stuff like this. And initially she'd let her win, but then eventually she got to the point where she would often beat Tsunade but not annoy her by always tying the games and basically just tiring Tsunade out, so she'd just give up. Now, what happens in the novel is she actually gets the key by using that tactic on the librarian guy, where they play like 5-6 games in a row, all resulting in ties, and the guy just gives up. As I suppose the book's logic was more about the idea that Sakura doesn't want to be seen to just sort of like go in and just immediately beat all the prisoners and kind of ruin her kind of good relationship she has with a lot of the prisoners, where if she just is seen to sort of tie all the games, she can win just by like staying in the games as long as possible. So the guy eventually in the book gives up and gives her the key, versus the show where she just wins but explains that this is a tactic you can also use. It's a change that feels a little bit like, did you need to do that or not? I get the idea that in the anime they maybe thought that we don't need to show Sakura doing this and then have her then explain afterwards that this is also what happened. So let's have her just win and then explain the tactic afterwards. It works, I guess, a little bit better. But anyway, they get down there, they get to read, the map of the heavens, and they get the kind of the listing of all the pictures and stuff like this. And this is maybe where there's a few connections that maybe they don't make that are made in the book. The book definitely has a few extra little stages as they figure this out, whereas it's a little bit more streamlined in the anime, where here they pretty quickly, upon looking at the pictures, realize that, it's the pictures are representing basically like the tail beasts, and then the Sage of Six Paths and the astronomer guy. That's what we're doing here. Whereas here I think initially Sakura is just like, oh, they're like the constellations, and then you have another scene out in the prison, and Sasuke realizes, thinking about the pictures, that like, oh, they represent the tail beast, and then they come back together and kind of figure out sort of what they need to do next, which is that the meeting is coming where the representative from from Rediku is coming to meet the prison warden, and Sakura is going to transform herself into that person and do the meeting that way, while Sasuke is going to infiltrate the cellar underneath the warden's office. So that's the sort of setup for the next episode. And then I suppose what we get is, I think we actually see the cellar, because we see the warden, Zansul, I think is his name, downstairs. And we see the dead dinosaur, and then there's just another one, and he specifically says in dialogue, it's okay, I can just make another one. So it's kind of creating the idea of like, okay, so this guy's able to make new versions of these dinosaurs. That, I guess, helps to potentially explain a little bit about them. That sort of, I guess, explains maybe why the Genjutsu stuff doesn't work, because they're just more like kind of constructs, effectively. It'll get explained more what exactly is happening here, but it's just a bit of a teaser about what exactly is happening here. But that's, I think, roughly where the episode ends, with the setup for like the next stage of the mission is going to be this like kind of, it could be a bit like, it could go wrong here. You know, what if the transformation is seen through? What if Sasuke gets caught? That sort of stuff. I do hope that as the episodes progress, we do get to see some of the stuff that Kakashi is doing in Rediku with like the prince, because that stuff is really cool. Like, there's some very cool action scenes that Kakashi goes through, and the resolution there, I think, is pretty good. So I hope we get that eventually. But by the looks of things, like, there's gonna be like a good few more episodes, in that, like, yeah, we're only up to about page like 90, and like the book's about like 180 or so pages. So, you know, if they want to, they could get through the whole thing in maybe like 2 more episodes, but I have a feeling they'll probably give it maybe 3. Again, I don't really look too far ahead of what like the known episodes titles are and stuff like that, but I'm guessing like 2 or 3 episodes, depending on how much of the other books they actually choose to adapt, along with just specifically Heavenly Stardust one here. But overall, I think it's a good adaptation so far. There's some very nice scenes in here. The fact that you're getting Sasuke, Sakura stuff as like your kind of like main event focus from these episodes, while there's actually like a bit of an interesting mystery going on. Like, it's always cool to get references back to the era of the Sage of the Six Paths, and these ultra particles is kind of like a somewhat interesting concept in terms of like, well, you know, the idea of like a cure that is like energy based, that comes from, you know, the cosmos, basically from space. And we know like that the Otsutsukis come from space, the Sage of Six Paths is an Otsutsuki. You know, you have a lot of these connections where it does link into the greater lore of Naruto. So there's a sort of places like a deeper significance on the idea of like meteorites and, you know, powers coming from, you know, other kind of celestial objects is kind of interesting. And then the dinosaur like mystery involved in it as well is weird, but it's also kind of very cool, because especially in the visual here compared to this, where in this, you know, like as they go through and describe it, they don't want to immediately describe a dinosaur to you. So it's more like, you think it's some sort of a weird dragon-like thing early on. And then it becomes more and more clear that, oh, no, they're just describing a dinosaur. And then it becomes clear, like, that's exactly what's going on. So visually, of course, here you get to see it's a dinosaur blatantly straight away. And now it's just the explanation of, like, what's going on here? Because, like, your assumption is just, like, I assume dinosaurs work the same way here, where it's ancient Earth, or whatever the name of the planet is in Naruto, had dinosaurs on it, so they're still viewed as being like ancient creatures. So, you know, what's going on here? Because again, you'll note that what they're actually doing, they're apparently digging a kind of a place where a big, you know, telescope is going to go. But they're digging, and where'd you get dinosaurs from? You know, fossils. You can sort of see where some of the connections and like the idea of where they're going with this. But they're my thoughts on the episode. So I'm really enjoying the arc, and I like that. One final thing is just, I like that in the moment, the scene where Sasuke gave Sakura the ring, you could tell they had like relatively high quality animation on just like a kind of character moment scene. So it wasn't necessarily an action scene, but they just made sure to get across the significance of that scene through having the characters be expressive in fundamentally a scene where there's not a lot of like motion kind of that you would expect from it, but just having like Sakura like with some kind of like nervous movement and stuff like that, how smooth the animation of like him picking up her hand, and then the way they shot the kind of reveal to kind of hide that he'd actually done anything at all, and then the reveal that she actually has a ring on. That was a very nicely done shot in my mind. So I like the episode, I like the arc so far, and I'm excited to see how they do the rest of it, because there is some pretty big cool set pieces, especially towards the end here. And then I want to see how exactly the adaptation goes. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode. Other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.